Thanks very much, Johnny. You're way ahead of schedule there, so thank you very much. You're perfect. At this stage, we'd like to open things up to the audience as much as possible to try and keep it as informal, direct the questions at the lads. You can see we've set up a lovely opera style. Someone mentioned that to me this morning. Some lovely, comfortable couches. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could take seats. And hopefully the three presentations have generated discussion amongst yourself at the break, and hopefully you have some questions. If you wouldn't mind, just around some rules, could you just put up your hand and we'll try and make it as orderly as possible. Maybe just give your name, first name is fine, and the organisation you represent.
I'm here from the School of Social Work and Social Policy in Trinity, and I have a question for Sean on his project. I just wondered, in the design of your project, did you ever consider actually interviewing the young people or the families involved in that particular community?
Yeah, it's a really good question. In fact, one of the limitations of the study, if you get a chance to have a read of it, says that it, one of the kind of deficits was not getting a kind of a rounded view about experience. I suppose two things really. Anybody who's kind of doing their PhD knows that there are resources for a lone researcher involved in kind of trying to do stuff and trying to kind of execute things. So there was partly kind of resource issues around that. Secondly, I suppose there was also kind of not necessarily ethical issues, but also, and it's a kind of a judgment call really, I felt in the community that we were looking at that there were potential ethical issues involved in talking to young people about people they had close relationships with, and that there may be kind of a risk element to that as well. This is a very kind of small community. On the flip side to that, I was kind of swayed. First of all, the guards said that they were interested in giving a kind of a perspective on this, on a local perspective. And there's some interesting kind of commentary on, if you were kind of stuck with one data point, where would you go? The kind of police perspective is much broader than, particularly in Ireland, much broader than a kind of law and order kind of agenda. So yes, I did consider it. Resource, potentially ethical, but also data issues stopped me from thinking about interviewing children, young people and families. If we was doing it again with more resources and more time, then yes, think about how to do that. But also, I actually think that talking to local Garda about their direct experiences over a long period of years was actually a fresh perspective as well.
Okay, thanks for that. So, questions? Perfect, here we go.
Thanks very much. They were all very interesting questions. I suppose, Johnny, can you say, are you in favour of decriminalisation or legalisation? And as regards the targeting of mothers, maybe it didn't emerge in the research, but what was the principal reason for them paying over the sums of money? Was it fear, do you think, for their own safety, or fear for their family members' safety, or perhaps guilt? Did any of that kind of detail emerge in the study? And do you think as well there might be consequences, say, for people getting out of prison not being received in the family home because of these type of issues following them? And what, if anything, can the prison system do to intervene to kind of prevent these community issues that might kind of be amplified in prison? So a lot of questions there.
Questions. I was going to stop you halfway, but I think the first one's around kind of legalisation, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it would have been parts.
Well, yeah, I'm in favour of decriminalisation, and I would say decriminalisation as a step towards some form of legalisation or regulation. But I say that in, often the issue of, well, firstly, the issue of decriminalisation and legalisation are often confused, firstly. And I would, like, increasingly now there's been talk about the process of decriminalisation as has been adopted in Portugal, which I think is a very positive approach, in that it's the decriminalisation of the personal possession of all drugs for personal use, and it's taken out of the criminal justice process entirely. into a sort of a more or what's called a dissuasion committee, where you're talking to social workers, health workers, etc. And if people have problematic or dependent drug use, that can be addressed in that forum and without giving them a criminal record. But that doesn't take away the criminal dimension. It doesn't take away the issue of drug supply. And that still has to be addressed. So long as there is demand, as I mentioned, there still will be supply. So how you still have to deal with that issue of this very lucrative market. What does it look like is something I wouldn't be aware of, and I think often, in debates, it's seen as a sort of a liberal issue. And I think the head shop phenomenon was a very interesting one, because I know from just seeing it in Dublin, people's exposure to more easily available drugs did have an impact on their use. And so it questioned this whole idea that, that restrictions on availability, the idea that it didn't matter whether drugs were available. It does matter. It will have an impact to a certain degree. So that's something that has to be grappled with. Now, so I say decriminalisation as a step towards regulation, considering it, and policymakers engaging with it, because we should be engaging with that. It's a democratic country. We have enough intelligence and wit to look at these issues. What we're doing at the moment isn't working. So what does regulation or legalisation look like? I don't really know, is the answer. But we have regulated alcohol, we have regulated tobacco, so we have to start thinking at least about what that might look like, because what is there at the moment isn't satisfactory. With regards to mothers paying the debt, well, I think, the question was why were they targeted?
Well, no, more kind of, did you uncover anything about their actual motivations for paying? Was it for their own safety, the immediate family, for the drug user themselves, or did that emerge?
Well, we sort of discussed this in various focus groups around the country and with family support groups, and often their first motivation is to protect their son, generally, from being attacked. Sometimes for many parents, when somebody knocks on the door looking for a drug debt to be repaid, it's the first time they realise that their kid is actually using drugs. And so that's a hugely challenging situation for many mothers. So firstly, there's the danger associated with this individual who's willing to knock on their door, demanding money for their behaviour of their son that they didn't even realise what was happening. So they want to get that situation resolved. And it's not really about themselves, I don't think, in any sense. I don't think it's about protecting themselves. It's about trying to make the problem go away. But then what becomes problematic, and this is a tricky one for the guards, because in a lot of, this won't be officially acknowledged, of course, by the guards, but in many cases the guards tell people to pay the debt. Some guards do. Other guards say don't pay the debt, because you're going to be seen as a soft touch and they're going to keep coming back for more. So it's a dilemma in that situation as well. And one thing that was established by the Family Support Network in association with the guards was a sort of a program whereby people could be given support. So parents would often come to projects or the Family Support Network simply looking for some sort of support. They're very stuck as to what to do, but they need somebody to talk to as to what their potentials are. The final issue with regards to prison, I think, is a very serious one, because there's a lot of violence in prisons associated with debt, with drug debt outside the prison, that follows people into the prison and follows them out of the prison and impacts on their families outside the prison. So there's very little escape from drugs. And also something like sometimes, for example, if the guards make a drug seizure, that is seen broadly by society as a very positive thing. It's reducing the amount of drugs that are available in society. But the drugs still have to be paid for. Once you have possession of the drugs, even if they're seized from you by the guards, you still have to pay for them. You still owe for that. And that debt has to be paid somewhere along the line. And so it's an unintended negative consequence of good law enforcement, that it actually can create further violence as a consequence of the debt being carried on. So I think the prison issue is a major one. How that is negotiated is something that maybe the prison service could think about within the prison.
Thanks. John, you had, yeah?
Yeah, so, Pamela, Just in response to that last question, sorry, John Flanagan is my name. I'm a sergeant in Henry Street in Limerick. I just want to thank the panel for their fascinating presentations. We came here today with 20 new probationer Gardaí that are working in disadvantaged areas of Limerick City at this moment in time. So I can say for all of them, I'm sure they found this very fascinating. Just in relation to the drug intimidation, I suppose An Garda Síochána has inspectors appointed throughout the country who it is their direct responsibility to engage and liaise with people who are reporting drug intimidation, and I'm sure Dr. Paddy was aware of that. And I suppose interagency cooperation in terms of youth workers and people that are coming to other organisations with information around drug intimidation. It's very important that interagency cooperation is going on and liaising with each other to support somebody that's reporting that. And I just wanted to say that that's what An Garda Síochána has in place in respect of drug intimidation that's taking place at a very serious level, and strategies and a process can come into place in terms of supporting a mother or a father or sibling of someone who is under drug intimidation. Just in relation to the points, I suppose, specifically for Dr. Sean and Dr. Paddy, in relation to possible solutions for the problems you've identified in your research, would it be fair to say, or would you strongly support, or can the Gardaí do more in respect of criminal asset bureau activity or criminal asset profiling, which is currently underway at a divisional level, so that we can identify these people that are enjoying the trappings at a lower level, in terms of maybe nice cars, nice clothing, nice equipment, that's creating an impression onto young people, leading them to think that this is a very attractive lifestyle, and it enhances their protectiveness, or the bubble of protection that they enjoy within local communities. That if the Gardaí, I suppose, at a divisional level, we have Criminal Assets Bureau working at a national level, but maybe more so at a more focused divisional level in these estates. Is that something that you could think, if it's enhanced, or can more be done to remove the bubble of protection that these guys enjoy?
Well, this is something that communities have been looking for 30 years, localised criminal assets bureaus. I mentioned Tony Gregory, and they were talking about it in the 1980s. It was always resisted. The Department of Finance always resisted on the basis that all of the money that was seized was going into the national coffers, and the drug strategy was being paid from that, so it was all the same anyway. But increasingly now it has been acknowledged there is a need to address the sort of middle-ranking or lower-ranking ill-gotten gains, as it were. And I have heard in Dublin in recent times that there's a commitment to do this at a lower level, at a divisional level. I think that isn't even far enough, in that it is also then what is done with those assets. I've been at conferences. I was at a conference in Manchester where we were collected by cars that had been seized from dealers. And I think returning the resources into building a community centre from the assets seized from a drug dealer will have far more impact on young people locally than any amount of criminal laws or prison sentences, etc. And so I think that is where it is about symbolic. That's a sort of a symbolic change where people say, okay, that community centre that I go to every day is seized from that guy who's now doing 6 or 7 years or whatever. Has a far more powerful effect on a local community. And I'd see that's where I think it's not just the seizure of assets, it's what you then do with the assets and return that money that came from that community back into that community.
I just might add to that. I think when we start looking at kind of solutions, particularly in relation to network disruption and the perceptions that people have in local communities, should definitely be one of the things on the table. I think we need to be very clear. This is why I was making the point before that with these kind of complex kind of situations, you have to be really, really careful about kind of doing something unless you know what the potential kind of consequences of that might be, which is why it's important, I think, to kind of deliberate over it and think, well, if this happened, what are the likely outcomes here? Because, as I say, I've been around long enough to see loads of things that seem intuitively and sometimes scientifically appropriate go a bit haywire because the local context wasn't taken account of. Having said that, intuitively, I think the idea of asset stripping people who have a proximal relationship, particularly with young people who are involved in drugs sale and burglaries, and they were the ones I was kind of more interested in the retail end, parent, do you know, they'll be kind of with children. I think that it would have an important symbolic value, whether it has a financial value or not, an important symbolic value of that idea of omnipotence. But again, I would make the point that the thing that we looked at in Greentown, and it'll be interesting to see now whether this bears any resonance across the rest of the country, has been around for a long time. So transitory kind of CAB kind of campaigns, they sometimes then fall into a kind of a cycle then of things get back on track after a while, you know. So it's about how that kind of network suppression can be done over the long term. So I would be, I think, probably in the same court as Eddie on this, is that we really need to think about how we can kind of adjust the policy levers to support that work on the ground. But in answer to your question, I definitely think it should be one of the things that we consider when we start looking at you know, the potential solutions.
Okay, I think we're just coming close to a finish, and I'm going to risk being selfish here and ask Nicola a quick question, if that's okay. I suppose from the Greentown research, we're aware, and we've seen it there, there's a huge familial aspect to it. You know, family are the key to recruitment, almost in a rite of passage for some of these young people. Do you see that? Is there a comparison with that in some of the stuff that you're doing up the north? Can you see that kind of paramilitary involvement? You know, is there a family aspect to it as well? Is that something that you have?
Yeah, absolutely. In relation to certainly some of the communities that we researched in and interviewed young people talked about certain families being, you know, that you would get in trouble if you got involved in any sort of intimidation or inadvertently attacked somebody from a particular family. So very much there was families that were considered powerful and kind of networks. And I suppose also what was also interesting was the kind of huge interrelationships within communities between people who were subject to violence, people involved in violence, and the complex interlinking of different families in relation to that. So very difficult to disentangle in some way, but certainly, you know, kind of family lineages were clearly evident. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. And at this stage, can we just give a round of applause for our speakers? Amazing. The piece that Sean alluded to at the start, the thank yous, I think we need to hit a few here for the School of Law, definitely the CCJVS, Centre for Criminal Justice and Victim Studies. Susan, thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you to yourselves for being here, for engaging with us. I hope this was useful for you. For those that stayed, we have a light lunch provided outside on your way. Again, hopefully you can hang around for a few minutes and generate some discussion out there. I think we'll be around for a few minutes ourselves. And the ITD as well, specifically, thank you very much for helping. We've videoed the event here today. Hopefully we'll be able to make it useful for people in the future. Alan, thank you very much. And thank you to the Chemie Business School in general. Cheers. Thank you.